morning, everyone. This is Paul Cooper. It is currently August 16th, and I'm bringing you this week's Market Meltdown. Now, last week we talked about Tesla briefly, and I pulled up a few articles. I'm not going to go super in depth in them, but I told you to have your popcorn ready. Well, Tesla and Elon Musk have not disappointed. So the SEC is now subpoenaing the company to get some more information after Elon was making all these statements about how he'd secure funding for them to go private. So we've got that. Tesla's board's throwing Elon under the bus for all of his stupid statements he's saying without talking to the board or the company at all. And then, if you've been following, there's some whistleblower who's released some VIN numbers of some Model 3s that have punctured battery modules to help warn the people that bought them. And if you've also been following, some of these Model 3s that have been released recently, the rear bumpers that cover to them have been falling off because they weren't properly designed. So if they're on the road in a rock or it's raining, then a rock will be channeled up towards the bumper, or the rain will be channeled up there, and then eventually the pressure just pulls the whole thing off. So as much as I think the technology is cool and I think it's probably the future, Tesla's really been hurting. So hopefully they'll be able to get together, but right now they're hurting bad, and it's not helping with Elon throwing all of his crazy shenanigans. All right, for our next article we're going to talk about is talking about housing in the U.S. and how housing starts are disappointing, and they're starting to fall for year over year. So in June, it was 12.9%. In July, it rebounded to 0.9%. They were expecting it, or hoping it would at least be 7.4%. So they're down significantly. Permits are down. Residential's way down, and even multifamily is down from the June crash. And year over year, this is the second month in a row that they're down. So probably a pretty good indication that things are going to slow down. It's a little early to tell, but I think if you've been following the markets at all, we're due for a pullback. And this may be a signal, or it could be that they'll go up for a little bit longer, but I think we're going to see this be systemic here in the next year or so if it doesn't start sooner. For our next article, we're going to talk about Australia. We've talked about them briefly in a few other articles, but it's talking about their record household debt. So right now, credit cards, home mortgages, and personal loans now account for roughly 189% of an average Australian's household income, compared to just 60% in 1988. So they have some of the most expensive housing in the world, and now they're starting to have to carry costs or their regular monthly expenses on credit cards and other personal loans. So it's not just their housing. Now they're really starting to fall behind on everything else. And so, unfortunately, Australia is probably going to be due for a really big pullback soon. They're in a huge bubble. Hopefully they'll be able to get it under control, but really when it's inflated this much, the average person is probably going to be in for some pain here shortly. For our next article, we're talking about what happened in the metal markets yesterday. So palladium plunged, and then copper. Dr. Copper crashed significantly. And I think we've talked about this briefly before, but they call it Dr. Copper because copper usually is a fairly good indicator on the health of a market. When copper crashes, it usually means we're going to go into a recession, and as the price of copper increases, it usually means the economy is doing well. And that's because it's such a big industrial metal. It's used in so much stuff for building and electronics and other things like that, that if the price is increasing, it usually means because demand is increasing as well, and either supply is low or demand's really high. And so that's why people usually use it as a fairly decent indicator for the economy. So I've got to imagine it'll probably bounce a little bit, but if it's going to be down in general, and it's slowly been going down this year, that's usually a fairly good indicator that industrial and construction use is going to be slowing down or has slowed down. And for our last article on Zero Hedge, we're going to talk about how gold and silver will trade during the next market crash. So you're starting to see a lot more of these gold and silver and precious metals articles come up. I've talked about briefly in the past how I already exited my position. I made some decent money on it. And these are becoming more mainstream. I've seen this person before. They're mainly focused on the gold and silver markets, so you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt, since these people are really bullish on precious metals. Um, and I'm not going to go super in depth into their article. The main thing I want to talk about is these are becoming more abundant, and usually when silver and gold articles become more abundant, that's usually a fairly good indicator that the economy's turning. And then, once these are on every single page of every news outlet and things like that, then that's usually either you're deep into a recession or it's starting to turn around. So it's just something to keep an eye on. When you start seeing these articles, it's on a very regular basis. It's usually a pretty good indicator that something's up with the markets. All right, everyone, for our first article on Housing Wire, we're talking about how Fannie Mae's rolling out a new process to streamline mortgage insurance claims. Now, I think it's good that, insurance claims should be streamlined, but if they're starting to streamline a process for mortgage insurance claims, it looks like it's because they're probably getting more claims, which is not good. So, to me, this kind of says that the economy's not that healthy if if there are a lot more mortgage claims taking place now. It's because more people aren't able to pay the mortgage, and they got approved for mortgages that they probably shouldn't have been approved for in the first place. And the only reason you should ever have mortgage insurance is because you didn't put 20%, or at least put 20% down payment. So have to keep an eye on that. All right, for our next article on Housing Wire, it's talking about how home remodeling surges 30% in the past 5 years. It addresses the fact in here how they haven't seen a big bounce back for new stuff for housing authorization since June, but they're trying to paint a rosy picture here by saying that remodeling alone is up 30% in the past 5 years, so things still have to be good. I'm not sure if that's necessarily true. Generally, people aren't going to, have the money for a big remodel unless they're doing well. But then there's this other factor that if you look in the car industry, when people are buying a bunch of new cars frequently or leasing new cars, then that's generally a fairly good indicator that there's more money in the economy. And then when there starts to be a recession, more people will buy used cars and they'll keep their cars longer and start doing more repairs on them and upgrades and things like that. So in a recession, in the auto industry, what you can look at is you can look at rubber prices and you can look at tires. If more people are buying tires and the stock on those companies is going up, it's usually a fairly good indicator, because some people will be buying and leasing new cars so frequently that they never have to get new tires for their car. And so when you start seeing a lot of new tire sales, then that indicates that more people are keeping their cars longer, which usually means that they can't afford to be buying new cars. So I'm not exactly sure how that applies to the housing industry, if it's the same thing. If people are like, well, I can't afford a new house or I can't afford to move, but I've got a few $1,000 saved up, I can remodel some stuff around here. I don't know if that's correlated at all. I could be way off, but it's just kind of an indicator to watch, and we'll have to see what happens. All right, for our next article on Housing Wire, it's called Follow the Money, Inside an Emerging Trend That Could Bring Relief to Home Prices. Shift to commercial investment could be solution to tension in single-family housing. So it talks about how single-family housing has seen a lot of appreciation. There are shortages of it. The income required to buy it is rising drastically. So it's talking about how people and non-institutional investors are starting to invest in commercial property now. They're getting away from the whole fix and flip deal because they're starting to realize it's overpriced and that you can lose a lot of money, and how there's a lot more interest in Class B and C multifamily properties. And then it gets down to talking about what is it. It's not like these people are going out and buying duplexes or multifamily. It's in share companies where you're buying a part of the investment. So it's a crowdfunding source for real estate investment, where these investors have to have roughly $25,000 to get started in it. And then you're buying a piece of a multi-million-dollar apartment or whatever they're investing in. I thought this was a little bit misleading. I thought it was going to talk more about how individuals are starting to get into it, but it's not. It's just crowdfunding sources. It talks about, people are starting to realize that they can, lose their asses when they do fix and flip. Well, here's the deal. In any investment, you could lose your ass on, especially if you're going to do commercial. we're probably due for some big real estate pullback, and commercial is probably going to really be hurting. Now, apartments, people always need a place to live, so usually, hopefully, they won't be as bad. But the other thing is apartment buildings are really getting overbuilt. And a lot of major cities, they've got a lot of them coming online. Like Denver right now has a ton of multifamily either in the works or coming online shortly, and so they're probably going to see rental rates drop. Now, if you have an experienced, company running it, if it's an older building to where you have some equity built in and you bought it at a good price, then you can probably afford to have lower rental rates. But if it's a brand new state of the art building and you're planning on having these rates, you could really be hurting if there's a 10 to 20% pullback in rental rates. So this article seemed a little smug to me. It's like, oh, people are getting smarter. They're making smarter investments. I don't think this necessarily is. It's like with anything, you need to know what you're doing. You need to have good people investing the money for you if you're not going to personally invest it. And I don't know if you're really going to be buying at a big discount. Now, it says Class B and C, so hopefully they're buying at a good discount. But then again, that people will buy these in the Midwest, not really knowing the area, and then they find out it's a multifamily in the south side of Chicago, and they lose everything. So be really careful, people. I'm not saying that crowdfunding sources to get into commercials is necessarily bad. It's just people are probably thinking, oh, I'm doing something special, getting a little smug. Oh, I'm not. I'm only doing 25,000 this multi-million-dollar property, but if it's not a good property, it doesn't matter how much or how little you have invested in, and you can still lose a pretty good percentage of what you put into it. In our last article for this week's Market Meltdown, it's going to talk about first-time homebuyers dominate the mortgage market. So you're still getting a lot of new people, first-time homeowners, to be buying properties in their first homes. And that's usually a good thing. That's usually an indicator that the economy's doing well, but it's kind of weird that it's only first-time home buyers. And one of the issues that I think could be bad with it is generally a first-time home buyer isn't going to be as savvy or knowledgeable about buying a home in the market as an experienced home buyer would, or someone who's bought several of them. If you haven't been through the process before, there's always a few little headaches and things like that, things that you should have done different. And these first-time home buyers, they could end up having stars in their eyes, like, oh, well, I qualify, I'm going to get a place, I'm not going to have to rent anymore. I'm not staying with family, I don't need roommates, I'm not staying in a dinky little apartment anymore. They're finally going to get their own place, and that could be fueling why there's so much appreciation in that and such a shortage in the market, because they're getting duped into buying things because they qualify, as opposed to buying them because they should and that they're getting a good price. These people are probably getting bad. They're probably getting bad mortgage rates. The new subprime mortgage rates are really taking off, and they're probably not getting the best of prices. So, again, that's just me taking a guess. That's not what this article talks about, and that's just how I feel. Well, anyways, that's it for this week's Market Meltdown. If you have any questions or comments or topics that you'd like me to cover, please reach out to me, and I hope you all have a good week.